Lelia Gowland, so happy you are here. How are you today?
I'm doing fabulously, Hunter. Thanks so much for having me.
So it's great to have you. So before we jump in, can you tell us a little bit about your career journey, how you've this has become a passion for you to help others express themselves authentically, and how tell me a bit about where that showed up for you and how maybe you struggled with that and how you got to this point.
Yeah, I started my work. So I was sort of a Jacqueline of all trades for many years. I ran a political campaign. I raised money for juvenile justice organizations, strategic planning for a regional environmental nonprofit. And I tease like I'm a Jacqueline of all trades. People come to me with, generally progressive causes that they know I would be good to work on. And then that all changed for me when 5 women came to me in the same month to ask for support in workplace negotiations and career decision making. And it prompted a real pivot professionally for me, where I spent many years focused on negotiation and workplace dynamics for women. And year after year, what I found was so much of the work I was doing with individual women and with these big professional associations of women, often in very, very male dominated industries like roofing, auto care, specific areas of law and medicine. What I found again and again is women were coming to me not just with questions about strategy on negotiation, but also how do we be our authentic selves in settings that may not be completely hospitable to us. And so I wrote this book, You Got This, the ultimate negotiation guide for professional women, which Samara is going to gracefully put in the chat. And it's really all about how do we show up in these conversations that can feel really fraught. They can feel really stressful and feel like in alignment with our own values. So me negotiating, the exact words I would use are not the same words you would use, Hunter, to be effective in a conversation. Just like you wouldn't go in my clothes to a negotiation, you wouldn't use the exact language that I would. And so the book really centers that idea of authenticity. Now, this kind of took a turn for me when right before my 37th birthday, I came out as queer. So I tease that I seem super straight, right? Like I am married to a cisgender heterosexual man. We have a blonde hair, blue-eyed child, and I live in a house that literally came with a white picket fence. So pretty clear, like I am just like a Southern mom doing my thing, very, straight lady. And part of my decision to come out as queer after hiding my identity for decades was a recognition of the acts of violence, both legislatively and physically, against the LGBTQ+ community. And I described coming out as the scariest thing I have ever done voluntarily. But what I found in that journey, what I found in sharing my truth and the invisibility and fear and stress that came with it, was how much people resonated with that story, even when they didn't share my identities. And so for me, there was a big shift in my business from I really work with negotiation, I work on negotiation for women, to saying, actually, this is a much broader conversation. And when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we can be having a much larger conversation about authenticity at work and how we can show up as our true selves.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that personal part of your journey. And I love hearing how, though the details might have been different for other people, they identified with the feelings of your experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things that I think powerful storytelling can offer. And so whenever I'm leading a session or a conversation, one of my priorities is to share my story and, with permission, share other people's stories so that we all feel less alone and can see ourselves in one another's experiences.
Yeah. One thing that I might have to contend with, though, is you have great fashion, so I might pull from your closet next time.
You would be more than welcome to.
I'm just saying.
I'm 5'2", so I'm not sure how the height would work, but you're more
maybe
than
just
welcome
the earrings and maybe some necklace.
Yeah,
I love a necklace.
Yeah, I've also added some sparkle to my hair, so if you want to add that, I can connect with the fairy lady who does it.
Vibe. Yeah, that's nice. So I love this too. So, authenticity shows up in a lot of different ways. It can show up in how we dress, how we speak, how we communicate, how we walk into a room, So how would you define authenticity? Because there is, like we were just saying, there's so many different ways that can show up. And different contexts for how authenticity is appropriate in different spaces.
Man, you know some stuff.
Let's get into it.
Let's do it. The way that I think about authenticity is being true to our identity, personality, values, and spirit, regardless of pressure to act otherwise. I think that second part of the definition is so important because there's so much social pressure to act otherwise, right? To come out of alignment with our own identity, personality, values, and spirit. For me, I went to an undergrad program at the University of Texas at Dallas that I loved in DC. And one of the key pieces of advice that really stuck with me is you want your message to be what people hold on to, not what you look like. And so I was told, and I like vividly remember this, small earrings, black or maybe blue suit if you're feeling really spicy, but like you are dressed in a way that like renders you invisible almost. And it wasn't until truly years into my career as a public speaker where people are handing me a microphone and putting me on stage to not blend in, did I realize, oh, I'm not here to be invisible. I'm not here. I don't have to render my physical body invisible, which is impossible, by the way. What actually I need to do is to feel comfortable and grounded in my own body and in my experience. And so the way I frame it, and my favorite analogy that's been really helpful to me, is to think about Mardi Gras Day. So if I showed up on I'm native New Orleanian, lifelong, and if I showed up on Mardi Gras Day in this outfit, I would feel very sad because I am a dedicated costumer. I have an entire closet dedicated to my costumes and think about them all year long. I get so excited. And so if I showed up in business casual, this is business casual for me, on Mardi Gras Day, I'd feel really weird about it. Just the same as if I showed up to give a speech with 3 giant googly eyes on my head, right? Like nobody expects me to show up on Mardi Gras Day in biz cash. Nobody expects me to give a speech with 3 giant googly eyes on my head. It'd be kind of fun, but pretty distracting. And it's the same about authenticity, right? Authenticity isn't about displaying every facet of your identity to everyone, everywhere, all the time in the exact same way. And so when I think about my Mardi Gras Day costume as like, of course, that's what I'm gonna wear. It's fabulous. It takes some of the pressure off of being in every setting saying that I'm queer, in every setting sharing this like specific part of my identity that may be a distraction from the actual topic I want to focus on that day.
Oh, I love that. And what I love hearing about this is it's actually can be empowering to choose when and where and how you're being authentic to yourself, as opposed to, oh, I don't want to show this because I need to be neutral, blank space, as opposed to, oh, this is what I want to focus on today. So I'm going to show up in this authentic way, in this context, to help drive my point.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that authenticity, particularly, and I think we're going to get into this in a little bit, but like when we're thinking about people with marginalized identities, authenticity can become a lot more complicated. And so recognizing how much performance or code switching is expected in professional settings. And I think it's really important to name explicitly, like these are spaces that were curated and created by white, cisgender, heterosexual men. And it is often a conversation that we're not having about what does professional mean? And it means often assimilating to the expectations of cisgender, white, heterosexual American men. And so when we can kind of acknowledge that and say, okay, well, that doesn't align with many of my identities, what parts of my identities do I feel important to me to bring to work? And how can I navigate this without losing myself? And systems level change, right? The systems level change, I think, is vitally important. And for the purposes of this conversation, I'm thinking about the individual.
Yeah. So we're touching on it, for different marginalized groups that can be a factor to be harder to be authentic at work when there is this expectation from the norm to assimilate to what other people are looking like. So what are some other factors, or if you want to dig deeper into that one, that make it harder or easier for folks to be authentic at work?
Yeah. With permission, I'll share a story from a former client and friend, Bahare. who I met at an event for her organization. It was a professional association, and her name tag said Baha. No, her name tag said Bahare, and she introduced herself as Baha. So we had a conversation. She called me later for coaching support, and I said, "What would you like me to call you?" She paused and she said, "Well, you can call me Bahare." And I said, "Great." She said it had been something she'd been thinking a lot about, that, her Persian identity and her Persian name was something that, she'd always assimilated. She'd wanted to make it easier on people and didn't want that kind of friction in early interactions. And so we moved on, and I thought about it years later and reached out to her and said, "Hey, would you be open to me including that conversation in a speech?" She said, "Yes, definitely. And my, how much has changed." So she found that she had another colleague who was a native Spanish speaker who pronounced Spanish words with a Spanish accent. And this got Bahare thinking, well, maybe I want to actually use my name and speak in a more authentic way, right? Assimilate less than has been my default. And her name was part of that. Now, the next day, her senior leaders came to her, or her next day, her senior leaders just started calling her Bahare. And she realized that that felt a little dissonant for her because she hadn't actually been a part of the conversation. They had overheard this chat she was having with a colleague or with a group of people, and they thought they were doing right by her, right? They were like, "Oh, wow, we really want to honor her identity." But they were actually still Americanizing her name. So even what she had told me, Bahare, was the Americanized version. And she told me this in our follow-up conversation. She said, "It's actually Bahare." And so I changed the pronunciation for me, and I made a phonetic pronunciation guide for myself because I think it's really important. But I think that story is really illustrative because then she went to her senior leaders and said, "I love that y'all are trying to do this. It really means a lot to me. And here's what would feel good to me. I actually want to continue to be Baha in the workplace. It feels a little bit forced. I've been here for 7 years, feels a little uncomfortable to suddenly switch to this name. But in professional correspondence with our outside clients and vendors, I want my name to be written as Bahare." And I think this is a really complicated example, and I almost didn't share it because it's a little bit, there's a lot to it. But that's why I have to share it, because it's not as simple as saying, call someone Baha or Bahare or Bahare, right? It's evolving and it changes over time. And I think the best gift we can give ourselves and one another is to acknowledge that fluidity, both in ourselves and in our colleagues, in our team members.
I love hearing that. And I'm so grateful that you had permission to share that and that you asked for that. And I think that's also just, that is a beautiful, there's so many beautiful examples of her story with her fluidity and her changing and learning about herself and how she can feel more comfortable, and also how that can inspire you as a point of example, and that you're able to have that dialogue with her and follow up with her. So there's so many great things that are happening in this story alone.
And I think there are two other elements of it that I really want to bring out. The first is that she didn't realize how much she had been assimilating until she had someone else who was not a native English speaker in her workplace. And maybe she had I can't speak to that, but until she had this conversation with someone else who was not a native English speaker. And so this is where representation really matters, because she was able to tune into herself even more clearly. And the other piece of it is that she wasn't expecting her employer to be perfect. She recognized, oh, they're not trying to be undermining. They're actually trying to witness me and hold space for my experience. I don't love how it happened. And their willingness to have that conversation allows her to feel really included and welcome in the organization. And so that sense of belonging is actually facilitated by challenging conversations, not by ignoring them.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So for folks that maybe are struggling to be their true self, their authentic self at work, what's some advice you could offer up to those folks?
Ooh. It is all, so I got a voice memo from a former client yesterday, and I just want to acknowledge with this question, and I acknowledge that it is always evolving, right? I teach this stuff for a living. I'm writing a book about it, and yet it is still ever evolving for me. On my Instagram this morning, I talked about how, it's International Women's Day, and I'm thinking a lot about how I perform gender. and I'm very femme presenting, right? I like lipstick, I have long hair, I wear big earrings. But also, since claiming my queer identity, I have stopped shaving under my arms. And as I was getting dressed today, I thought, especially virtually, I really like to present sleeveless. I'm a sweaty lady. And I felt hesitant. I was like, okay, well, if I keep my arms down, maybe they won't notice. And I'm like, Lelia, it's literally a talk on authenticity. And that grappling with, okay, is this going to be a distraction? Are you not going to be able to hear me because you're so focused on my underarm hair? Or is this a space where actually maybe that will be welcome, and seeing some different ways of engaging with our bodies and engaging with gender might be helpful or neutral? Now, I will say, if I were giving a speech to a corporate environment, I would likely either wear cap sleeves, a blazer, and that's the choice I've been making, but that's potentially going to change for me as well. I put together a quiz. So when I was a kid, I loved the listicles and Cosmo style quizzes, which in retrospect were super problematic. But I just thought it was
Yes.
fun to answer these questions, like which Sex and the City character are you, based on this BuzzFeed quiz.
Right.
So I put together a quiz about authenticity, and really what I found, and Hunter, I think, is going to pull it up. But what I found is that when people are struggling with authenticity, it often falls into one or many of the following 4 categories: imposter syndrome, self-doubt, people-pleasing, or avoiding your feelings. For me, it's usually a hybrid of all 4. So I'm going to let Hunter, Hunter's agreed graciously to go through a couple of the fun quiz questions. And Samara's going to put it in the, Samaya, excuse me, will put the quiz in the chat for later.
Okay, great. So I'm putting it there as well, and they can relay that. So this is the website, friends. If you go to leliagowland.com/quiz, and it should be available in the chat too. You click this, take a quiz. Let's do it. Okay, so walk me through this. Hold my hand.
So you've got a big presentation tomorrow, hypothetically, right? So feel nervous. How do you feel, right? Are you feeling nervous? But anytime those fears come up, you push them away, reminding yourself what a great opportunity this is. You worry you're going to get stage fright and freeze up. You question whether you're the right person to give this talk. Or 4, do a run through with all of your colleagues and try to integrate every single piece of feedback, even the ones you don't totally agree with.
Well, as imposter syndrome is an ongoing journey for me, that is definitely question if I am the right person for this talk.
Woo, so real. Okay, so we'll do this last question, then we'll move on. So you're deciding what to wear to a fancy work dinner. You want to wear your brightly colored new ensemble, but worry it'll be too much. I won't get into it, but wow, real talk, silver sparkles. 2, doubt whether you shouldn't have gotten the invite, so wear whatever will most blend in. 3, are nervous you're going to be awkward during the cocktail hour. You pick your most playful attire, so it's a fun talking point. Or 4, ask your colleagues what they're wearing and base your outfit on that.
Ooh, wow. Probably the first one for me.
Yeah. And so the idea that I'm too much is a huge part of my own personal challenge with authenticity. And we can put the quiz away. So that idea that I heard from a reader after I came out, and she wrote, not sharing my queer identity, she said, I'm constantly worried I'm both somehow too much and not enough. And it's just, it kind of wrecked me in the best way possible, because so much of what I was taught success looked like was assimilation, was making sure that other people were comfortable, was centering, doing these contortionist moves to fit in and to do what I was supposed to and be on the right path professionally. And I think it's so important to acknowledge those internal fears. And I think societally, we're talking about them more. PwC, the artist formerly known as PricewaterhouseCoopers, big consulting firm, did an analysis of the Great Resignation. Like, why are people leaving their jobs in massive numbers? And one of the key factors they found is people felt they couldn't be their true selves at work. And I think this is a moment, and the pandemic really facilitated this, as did the heightening of the Black Lives Matter movement and so many other kind of movements around racial injustice, is to say, no longer are we standing for the way things have been. And there's a really uncomfortable middle period that we're in right now. And we're all trying to navigate it. And employers are saying, like, oh God, can't you just be like little robots that do what I tell you, like before? And employees are saying, absolutely not. But I don't know what it looks like to be my full self when that may come with tremendous social risk. And so this playful quiz will take you through, I think it's 6 questions, really straightforward. And then tell some stories about my own experience and experiences of my clients navigating those issues.
Oh, that is so powerful. And that too much and not enough, I definitely, as a queer person, like that is something, thanks to like therapy and outside help, that I can like hear that voice and be like, I hear you, thank you. And perhaps that is not true, just perhaps, not to go down too far the therapy train, but like something that works for me too is like, what age is this conversation? Is this like, is this a little 8-year-old hunter that feels like he's being too much right now? Or like the 16-year-old that isn't enough, what age is this conversation? Who is this person that's talking right there? And to like be gentle with it and kind for me, because it's easy to like, make it worse and be like, oh, I'm dumb for even thinking that, like that's a whole nother train. So it's like self-compassion that I have to, and I get to invite now as an adult is really important for me in like coming out of my shell.
Oh, Hunter, thank you for sharing that. It aligns with a lot of the work when I was doing one-on-one coaching and in my own both therapeutic and coaching practices when I'm receiving those services, is to really hold space for those big, scary feelings and acknowledge that this is often a really young part of ourselves that was told either explicitly or implicitly that we were too much, or that we were not enough, or that we had to fit in to be safe. And I think so often the berating ourselves for this inner critic and banishing the inner critic actually causes more harm. And to say instead, how can we be with those scary feelings? How can we support ourselves through what has, that instinct toward fitting in has been what kept me safe, right? And it kept me safe for a really long time. And maybe I don't need that anymore, or maybe it shows up differently now. And so I think that your point about how do we talk to ourselves, what is that inner journey like, is so important. It's one of my favorite speeches to give is on self-compassion, using Kristen Neff's brilliant research on how do we, we get a lot of training. God, I'm not going to remember who says this. Wonderful man who maybe I'll remember later. Once I'm washing my hair, I'll immediately remember. But he says we get a lot of training on how to interact with others, but not a lot of training on how to interact with ourselves. And I think authenticity comes at this bridge, right? Because it's about, what do I feel like within my body? And I think this is really true for people experiencing gender dysmorphia, grappling with marginalized identities or being mixed race, or how their race is received, right? I think about, particularly with what's happening in the news, people with Chinese, Russian, Palestinian identities, particularly in the US, and how those identities are received by others, right? There's so much to be navigating in our own experience of our identities, and then also how other people receive it. And I think authenticity lives in that in-between space of how do I feel and how do I relate to others about my identities.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. We could do a whole summit just on this. I feel like we only have 5 minutes left. So in these last couple of minutes, maybe we can jump in and talk about how employees, how they can share potentially vulnerable information at a workplace setting, or if that's appropriate, and would it potentially make something harder if they did open up, whether they're neurodivergent, maybe there was a miscarriage, something that's really challenging and extremely personal. Is it appropriate? When's the right time to do it? Is it a safe environment to do it? How do we check those things so that it is safe for us, and to be authentic?
Hunter, I would like to do an entire summit on that question alone. Since we
Yeah.
have 5 minutes, I'll have you pop up a guidebook that I put together of sample language, and we'll put it in the chat. So if you join my newsletter community, I'll share this document with you that has really clear sample language to walk you through or take you through, trying not to use ableist language, take you through some tools for having these conversations that can feel a little bit scary. And I think your questions about when is it appropriate to share and how are really big ones that I'd love to address another time. And I do in some of my other sessions. But if you'll scroll down 2 pages, there's the 3rd page. Yeah, so if you can, the 3rd page, if you go back one. There it is. Okay, it's showing a banner. So you'll see a lovely note from me. And then let's say you want to talk with your supervisor about your example of neurodivergence. So I had a direct report who kept coming to me. She was a college student and she was really struggling with her duties as assigned. And so we were having lots of conversations. How can I support you? What should it look like? And ultimately she said, and I'm going to quote her on this because I think it really does her justice. She said, I hadn't considered my dyslexia a particularly relevant or authentic thing about me. I just thought, well, everyone has stuff, so who cares? It genuinely wasn't until you were asking me to talk about the shortfalls of my work that it dawned on me, this sounds like what a dyslexic person would struggle with, which makes sense given that I am in fact super dyslexic. I remember you giving me the feedback that I was an oversharer. Totally true, still struggle with it. And I was concerned that sharing the dyslexia thing would be oversharing. Now, her work with me helped her realize this was actually a huge advantage to talk about early on in her professional life. So in job interviews, now she brings it up and has this great answer. What are your strengths and weaknesses? And she talks about, I just struggled with dyslexia. These are the tools I use. I know how to do it now. And so I offer that example to say, as an employer, I was candidly, and again, this is shared with permission, extremely frustrated with her because she kept not doing the thing I was asking her to do. And I was like, what other supports can we put in place? How can I support you in getting this work done? What else do you think would be helpful, right? I was doing everything I could think of as a manager. And ultimately what changed everything for us was her trusting me with this part of her identity. And so to pre-frame the conversation, she could have said something like, there's a part of my identity that I'd like to share with you. And I think it's really important when you're talking to someone to make a specific request. So you could say, I'd love for you to help me decide what to do next. Or speak up if, so this example is actually, well, I'll just keep going with this one. And then once she's shared and I say, wow, like, thank you so much. How can I support you with this or whatever? She could say, that's all I want to share in this moment, right? If she's at her emotional capacity talking about something that feels really sensitive to her, I think it's really powerful to have a way to stop the conversation. So this 3-part series, sample language to frame the conversation, is really designed to give you some bumpers, right? Like if you think about in bowling, when you put the bumpers in the gutters, the only way I can get a strike, it's to pre-frame the conversation, right? If you're dealing with a microaggression or sharing about a miscarriage, you've got some sample language to say, this is what we're going to talk about, to make a specific request. They're not like, oh, let me tell you about my miscarriage, or I went through a divorce too. Let me tell you about it, or let me share it with the whole team. That you're really clear about what you're looking for from the conversation, and then you have a way to end it.
Oh, that is awesome to have a roadmap and a way through. So thank you for that. Lelia Gowland, we are out of time. It flew by. I would love to keep the conversation going. How can people do that with you in the meantime until we get to do this again?
Wonderful. I would love that. So if we can pop into the chat, the link to my newsletter community, I would love to stay in touch. I'll be sure that you get access to that quiz and to the resource I just shared with sample language for how to have brave and authentic conversations at work. And then lastly, my Instagram is at Lelia Gowland. So just my first name, last name on Instagram. Would love to be in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much for making the time today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Hunter, thanks so much for having me. Bye, y'all.
Take care now.